Sometime in the late 1980s, Kiss bassist Gene Simmons decided he wanted to start a record label. 'Cause, sure. He said in his 2001 autobiography, "Life has given me the opportunity to take advantage of my whims, at least to the point where I can get doors opened. One day, I was sitting around thinking of other projects that interested me, and it suddenly occurred to me that I would like to have a record label. I had always taken an interest in younger bands. If there was a Geffen Records, I thought, why couldn't there be a Simmons Records?" Simmons decided to reach out to RCA, who had a certain history with rock and roll, such as Elvis, but he felt at the time that they had no real rock presence. Through RCA, Simmons got his own record label, Simmons Records. The first act Simmons signs was this guy named Loz Neto. I only know this because Simmons included an ad for Simmons Records in his book, which showcases a record by Neto called Loz. From what I can tell, no album with this title was ever released. On his website, Neto has an album called Let's Fool Around listed as the album he made for Simmons Records, though, again, I don't know if this album was ever actually released. There are some samples on the website, and it's 80s synth pop. Not sure what the deal was here. The first proper release is the self-titled debut album of House of Lords, released in 1988. House of Lords is ostensibly a continuation of the band Geoffria. When Simmons signed them, he did so under the condition that they change their name. The original lineup consisted of Greg Geoffria on keyboards, James Christian on lead vocals, Lanny Cordola on guitar, Chuck Wright on bass, and Ken Mary on drums. Their self-titled debut was produced by Andy Johns and Geoffria, with Simmons serving as executive producer. I think to enjoy this, or any of the albums we're going to talk about, you have to like 80s hair metal. You just have to. This album is so 80s it hurts. It's catchy and fun, but it is very of the times. If you're down with that, I recommend it. If not, don't be surprised. The album peaked at number 78 on the Billboard 200 chart and featured two singles, I Wanna Be Loved and Love Don't Die. Next up is Silent Rage, a band that formed in 1985 with E.J. Curse on bass, Jesse Damon on lead vocals and lead and rhythm guitar, Mark Hawkins on lead and rhythm guitar, lead vocals and keyboards, and Jerry Grant on drums. Their debut album, Shattered Hearts, was released in 1987. Simmons signed them to his label the following year with Brian James Fox taking over on drums. Their sophomore effort, Don't Touch Me There, would be released in 1989. The album was produced by Paul Sabu and Silent Rage except for 3 songs, I Wanna Feel It Again, Tear Up the Night, and Shake Me Up, which were produced by Simmons and Silent Rage. Simmons also produced the vocals on Touch Me. This isn't a bad album, but I don't think it's anything to write home about. It's kinda generic hair metal, and there are so many better options out there in this subgenre. I will say there are some cool bass licks, and there are 2 highlights. The big one is Rebel with a Cause. It's cheesy and, of course, of the times, but it's catchy and memorable. A pretty dang fun song. I also liked Can't Get Her Out of My Head. Another noteworthy track is All Night Long, written by then Kiss guitarist Bruce Kulick and Adam Mitchell, a frequent collaborator of Paul Stanley. Might be worth checking out for Bruce Kulick and 80s Kiss fans. Silent Rage disbanded in the early 90s cause, well, this little thing called Nirvana happened, which systematically wiped the hair bands off the face of the earth like it was Judgment Day. And I mean, look at these guys. Of course grunge wiped them out. The major heavy hitters of hair metal barely made it through the 90s. What chance did Silent Rage have? They would later reunite in the early 2000s once nostalgia for hair metal started to creep in, and they even worked with the legendary producer Bob Ezrin. Kiss connections left and right with these dudes. Simmons even recorded some demos with them in the early 90s. Next one is a little weird. This is Gypsy Rose, consisting of Michael Ross on lead vocals, Craig Van Gaver on lead and rhythm guitar and keyboards, Brian Jose on lead and rhythm guitar, Michael Vaughn on bass, and Steve Thomas on drums. Simmons said in his book that this band was kind of forced on him by RCA for credibility purposes, and he did not appear to be as enthused about this band. I do think think it is the worst of the Simmons Records releases. It's more generic hair metal. It was produced by Tom Troymuth and Gary Furness, with Simmons serving as executive producer. The second half is stronger, with Make Me Do Anything You Want and Don't Turn Your Back on Me being the highlights, though I think even those are only okay. They also disbanded in the early 90s, 3 guesses why, though they reformed a few years back. The final album we're going to look at is House of Lords' second album, Sahara, released in 1990. It was recorded without original guitarist Lanny Gordola, with Michael Guy and Doug Aldrich taking over guitar duties as well as some guest spots, most notably Rick Nielsen of Cheap Trick, who provides some really good guitar on Hard on the Line, a song he also wrote. The album was produced by Andy Johns and House of Lords, with Gene Simmons serving as executive producer. This is another really solid album, catchy, fun, and sounds great. Again, I think you have to be into 80s hair metal, but I dug it. Ken Mary is a beast on drums. He was the highlight for me. The album peaked at number 121 on the Billboard 200. House of Lords released a third album, Demons Down, in 1992, though not through Simmons Records. However, the band broke up the following year, another victim of Judgment Day, though they also reformed in the early 2000s. Now you might ask, why didn't Simmons Records release the third album? And the answer is because Simmons Records no longer existed. Simmons said, "I was still in KISS, and even if I wasn't devoting my full attention to the band, I knew it had to remain a top priority. Pretty soon it became clear to me that there just were not enough hours in the day for me to manage my own label. When the time came, RCA didn't pick up the option, and Simmons Records disappeared." And I think this is at the crux of the issue of why this label didn't really last or succeed. The House of Lords records did okay-ish, certainly a start that could be built on, as Kiss's success was. They weren't selling platinum albums overnight. I think there's a real dedication you have to run a record label and break artists, and as Simmons pointed out, he was stretched way too thin. It is quite infamously known among Kiss fans that Simmons was not exactly super focused during the 80s. He was still a member of Kiss, writing and singing half of the albums, as well as producing alongside Paul Stanley, who was writing and singing the other half of those albums. He was trying to have an acting career, producing, managing, and writing with other bands such as Black and Blue, plus trying to run a record label. Stanley said in his autobiography, "Gene just didn't care. He would show up in the studio after being up all night with some third-rate band he was producing, exhausted, with some half-assed song he wanted to put on our album that he may or may not have actually written." I get Simmons' perspective of wanting to do a bunch of different things. I think the problem is when you're not 100% dedicated to something, the results kind of speak for themselves. If you try to multitask 5 things at once, sure, you might be able to do them, but you're not going to be able to do all of them to the best of your ability. So you end up sort of, as Stanley said, half-assing things. Simmons Records is not something he felt passionately about. By his own admission, it was just a whim that hit him one day. Why not have a record label? I think that kind of speaks for itself and why it didn't really go anywhere. The records are all pretty obscure, and you'd have to be a major fan of either Gene Simmons, hair metal, or both to find them. Simmons has tried restarting his label a couple different times, most notably to release his second solo album, Asshole, which, yeah, an interesting little footnote in history though, and hey, some of the music was fun. Have you heard these albums? Are you a fan of any of these bands? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe and all that stuff.